I texted in our family group chat, "I'll be discharged from the hospital in 20 minutes. Can anyone come pick me up?" My daughter replied, "I'm a little busy. Just take the train home, Dad." Then my son said, "I already called a taxi for you. Just wait a little longer." I believed him and waited outside the hospital. But moments later, my grandson called and whispered, "Grandpa, don't get into that taxi." When the driver stepped out of the car, I froze in shock and fear. Thank you so much for being here on Dad's Revenge Stories. Where in the world are you watching from? Comment your city or country below. I'd love to connect. Please note, this story contains fictional elements added for entertainment and educational value. Any similarity to actual names or places is purely coincidental, but the lesson within is genuinely useful. The text message came in at 3:42 in the afternoon, and I read it twice before I hit send because asking my own children for anything had never come easy to me. Not once in 68 years. I typed it out slow, standing near the window of my hospital room, with the afternoon light cutting flat across the floor tiles. "I'll be discharged in about 20 minutes. Is anyone able to swing by and pick me up?" I read it back. It sounded too formal. I almost rewrote it. Then I told myself I was 68 years old and I sent it the way it was. Derek answered first. 2 minutes, 40 seconds, I know, because I was watching the screen. "Already called a cab for you, Dad. Driver's on his way. Just wait out front." Then a thumbs up emoji. That was it. No, "How are you feeling?" No, "Glad you're getting out." Just a thumbs up and instructions on where to stand. I didn't answer him. Vanessa came through 4 minutes later. "Kinda busy, Dad. Just take the train home." I sat down on the edge of the hospital bed. The paper cover crinkled under my weight. I read her message again. Kind of busy. I had spent 31 years inside a machine shop breathing metal dust and hydraulic fluid, so my daughter could go to a college that cost more per semester than I earned in a year. Kind of busy. I put on my jacket. The nurse, a young woman named Carol Ann, who had checked my blood pressure every morning for 9 days, came in with the discharge paperwork. She asked if my family was coming to get me. I told her my son had arranged a ride. She smiled and said that was good, that patients shouldn't be going home alone after a stay like mine. I agreed with her and signed where she pointed. I wheeled my own bag out to the front entrance because Patricia offered, and I told her I was fine. The afternoon was thick and warm the way Houston gets in May, when the humidity sits on your shoulders like something with weight. I stood under the overhang and watched the cars pull in and out of the patient pickup lane. My phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my chest tightened before I even answered. 40 years working around heavy machinery teaches you to pay attention to the things your body notices before your brain catches up. "Grandpa." Noah's voice was low and fast. "Don't get in that cab. Whatever you do, don't get in." My throat closed. "Noah, I'm serious, please. Just stay where you are. I'm 12 minutes away." I turned and looked at the pickup lane. A dark sedan had just pulled to the curb. The driver's side door opened. Marcus Webb stepped out. I knew Marcus. Not well, but I knew him. 5 years back, I had found him on the shoulder of Route 10 with his hood up and his hazard lights going late on a Tuesday evening in the middle of July. I had pulled over because that's what you do, or at least what you used to do. Spent 40 minutes on the side of the highway getting his alternator sorted while the traffic blurred past us. He had tried to pay me and I had told him to put it away. Marcus was not a taxi driver. Marcus drove for a private car service that took corporate clients to the airport and back. He had no reason to be outside St. Catherine Medical Center at 4 in the afternoon, holding a door open for me unless someone had paid him specifically to be there. He saw me looking at him. Something moved across his face, not guilt exactly, more like a man deciding something in real time. "Mr. Cole," he said. He didn't move toward me, just stood there with one hand on the roof of the car. "Marcus." My voice came out steadier than I felt. My heart was hitting the inside of my chest hard enough that I could feel it in my back teeth. "I think—" He stopped, cleared his throat, started again. "I think you ought to wait for your grandson." I stared at him. The humidity pressed down on both of us. "Marcus, what exactly were you hired to do today?" He looked down at the pavement. His jaw worked for a second. Then he said quietly, like he was confessing something in church, "Take you to a private care facility outside of Beaumont. I was told you'd agreed to it. I was told it was already arranged. Beaumont is 80 miles east of Houston. I have never agreed to anything in Beaumont in my life. I have never heard of a care facility in Beaumont." My hands were not shaking, but they wanted to. "Who hired you?" I asked. He looked up. "Ms. Vanessa Cole. She called me direct. Said her brother had already cleared it with you." He paused. "Mr. Cole, I drove halfway here before something didn't sit right with me. That's why I called your grandson." The ground felt slightly less solid than it had a minute ago. Not because I was sick, I was not sick, whatever that altered document in my file claimed, but because I was standing in front of a man who was telling me as plainly as a man can tell another man something that my daughter had arranged for a stranger to drive me to a place I had never heard of without my knowledge or my consent on the day I was being discharged from the hospital where I had spent 9 days recovering from the shock of losing my wife, Margaret, my Maggie, gone 11 weeks by then. And our children had looked at the calendar and decided this was the moment. Noah's car came around the corner at a speed that suggested he had not been entirely observing the posted limit. He pulled up behind Marcus's sedan and was out of the car before it had fully stopped moving the way young men move when they are frightened and trying not to show it. He put himself between me and the sedan without making a production of it. Just stepped up beside me and said, "Grandpa," and put one hand on my arm. "I'm all right," I told him. My voice cracked on the second word. I cleared my throat and said it again. "I'm all right, son." Marcus Webb stood at his car and watched us. He was turning something over in his hands, his phone, I realized. He looked like a man who had made a decision and was waiting to see if it had been the right one. "Mr. Cole," he said. I saved the call, the one where she gave me the instructions. "If you ever need it, keep it," Noah said. His voice was even. "Please." Marcus nodded once. He got back in his car. He did not drive away immediately. He just sat there with the engine running, while Noah walked me to the passenger side and opened the door. I sat down. The seat was cool. Noah closed the door and went around to the driver's side, and we pulled out of the patient pickup lane and into the afternoon traffic, and I did not look back at the hospital or at Marcus Webb sitting at the curb. Noah drove and didn't speak, which was the right call. He had learned that from somewhere. Maybe from me, maybe from Maggie, probably from Maggie. My hands were flat on my thighs. I made myself breathe in for 4 counts and out for 4 counts, the way the cardiologist had told me. I watched the buildings go by. A gas station, a dry cleaner, a Whataburger with a line of cars wrapped around the building. Houston just kept going the way cities do, completely indifferent to the fact that my whole life had just shifted 3 inches to the left. After a while, Noah said, "I've got something for you, Grandpa. From Grandma. She made me promise to give it to you today." I turned and looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. His hands were tight on the wheel, and his jaw was set in a way that reminded me with a force I was not prepared for of Maggie when she was holding something difficult together. "She knew," I said. Noah's throat moved. She knew a lot of things. Noah drove another 4 blocks before either of us spoke again. The city moved past the windows in that indifferent way cities have traffic lights, cycling a man walking a dog, a woman pushing a stroller over a cracked sidewalk, all of it completely unchanged by the fact that my daughter had just tried to have me driven 80 miles from my home without my knowledge or consent. "How long have you had it?" I asked. Noah kept his eyes forward. "Since the day before she passed. She called me into the room alone, made me wait until Dad and Aunt Vanessa had gone down to the cafeteria." He paused. "She timed it, Grandpa. She actually timed it so she'd have exactly 15 minutes with just me. That was Maggie. 39 years. I had watched that woman run our household, raise 2 children, teach Sunday school, keep track of every birthday and anniversary and doctor's appointment in a family of 6 extended members, and never once miss a detail that mattered. She had been sick for 14 months by that point. 14 months of chemotherapy and setbacks and trial treatments and more setbacks, and even then, even in that bed, with the machines counting everything that was left to count, she had found a 15-minute window and used it precisely. "She gave me a box," Noah said. "Told me to keep it at my apartment. Told me not to give it to you until the day you were discharged. Not before." He glanced at me for just a second. "She said you'd try to handle everything alone if I gave it to you too early. She said that was your worst habit." I looked out the passenger window. My throat was doing something I did not have full control over. "She wasn't wrong," I said. Noah reached behind his seat without looking and pulled a metal box onto the center console between us. It was small, maybe 8 inches long, the kind of fireproof lockbox you could buy at any hardware store for $30. The kind I had kept in my own workshop for decades, for documents I did not want to lose in a flood or a fire. The latch had a small combination lock on it. Noah reached into his shirt pocket and put a folded piece of paper on top of the box. "See the combinations on there," he said. She wrote it herself. I picked up the box. It was lighter than I expected. I held it in both hands for a moment, the way you hold something when you are not quite ready to open it, and looked at the piece of paper. Maggie's handwriting. Neat and slightly slanted to the right, the way it had always been, the way it had looked on every grocery list and birthday card and note she had ever left on the kitchen counter for 39 years. I worked the combination. The latch clicked open. Inside there were 2 things. A small, spiral-bound savings passbook, the old-fashioned kind that banks stopped issuing regularly 15 years ago, and an envelope with my name written on the front. Just Raymond. Not Dad. Not Honey. Just my name in her handwriting, like she wanted to make sure I understood she was talking directly to me and no one else. I picked up the passbook first. The account was held at a credit union I did not immediately recognize, not the bank Maggie and I had used for the last 2 decades. The account had been opened 14 months earlier, right around when the diagnosis came back the second time. It was a joint account. The names on the front were Raymond Cole and Noah Cole. The balance was $43,000. I sat with that number for a moment. $43,000 that I had not known existed in an account I had not known was open, that my wife had apparently been building quietly while she was simultaneously fighting for her life. "Did you know about this?" I asked Noah. "She told me it existed," he said carefully. "She didn't tell me how much was in it. That was between you and her." I set the passbook on my knee and opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages front and back, written in Maggie's hand. I will not repeat every word she wrote because some things belong only to the person they were written for. But I will tell you what she said that mattered most. She wrote that she had watched our children for a long time, and that what she saw had frightened her more than the diagnosis ever had. She wrote that Derek had borrowed money from us 11 times in the past decade. She had kept a list, dates and amounts, and the list ran to half a page. She wrote that Vanessa had accepted help from us in ways she had never acknowledged, not once, not with so much as a phone call after the fact. She wrote, "They are not bad people, Ray, but they have learned that you will always be there, and that has made them careless with you. I am afraid of what they will do when they think there is no one watching." Then she wrote the line that put both of my hands flat on my knees to keep them from shaking. "If something happens to me, they will come for the house. I have already taken steps to make sure they cannot have it. Diane Holloway has the paperwork. Trust her completely. Trust Noah completely. And Raymond, please, for once in your life, let someone else carry something for you." I folded the letter along its original creases. My chest felt like something heavy had been set down on it from a very great height, and at the same time, underneath all of that, there was something else. Something I had not felt since the morning Maggie stopped breathing. Something that took me a moment to identify because it had been so long. It felt like not being alone. "She set up a trust," Noah said quietly. He was not asking. He already knew. "Apparently," I said. My voice came out rough at the edges. "Diane Holloway is a property and an estate attorney. Grandma met with her 4 times while you were at work last winter." He hesitated. "I drove her to 2 of those appointments." I turned and looked at my grandson. He was 26 years old, with Maggie's eyes and my hands, and he was gripping the steering wheel like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was only now allowing himself to set it down. "She asked me not to tell you," he said. "She said you would have tried to talk her out of spending the money on the attorney." "She was right," I said. "I know." He exhaled slowly. "She usually was." I looked back down at the letter in my hands. Outside, Houston kept moving. Somewhere across this city, in a house that still had Maggie's reading chair angled toward the window and her coffee mug on the second shelf, and 39 years of our life built into every corner, my son and daughter were making plans that their mother had already quietly dismantled. They just did not know it yet. Frank DeLuca lived in a narrow 2-story house on Elmwood Street that he had owned for 34 years and painted exactly once in 1998, a shade of green his wife Gloria had chosen before she passed, and that he had never seen any reason to change. The porch light was on when Noah pulled up, which meant Frank had been expecting us. I had called him from the car and said 4 words, "I need a place." He had said, "Porch light's already on," and hung up. That was Frank. 31 years working side by side in the same machine shop will either make 2 men hate each other or make them into something closer than most brothers ever manage. Frank and I had landed on the second one somewhere around year 4, when we had stayed 3 hours past the end of our shift to get a compressor rebuild finished before a Monday deadline, and had eaten cold sandwiches on the shop floor and talked about our wives for the first time. He knew Maggie nearly as well as I did. He had cried at her service in a way that told me he was not crying for appearances. He opened the door before I reached the top porch step. He was 71 years old, built like a man who had spent decades lifting things that resisted being lifted, with white hair cut short, and hands that looked like mine, scarred across the knuckles, permanently stained along the creases with the ghost of engine grease that no amount of soap ever fully removes. He looked at my face, and then at the small bag I was carrying, and did not ask a single question. He just pushed the door open wider and said, "Coffee's on." The kitchen smelled like motor oil and burnt toast, which was the smell of Frank's kitchen as far back as I could remember, and sitting down at his table felt like putting weight onto something solid after a long time standing on uncertain ground. Noah carried my bag in and set it by the door. Frank put 3 mugs on the table without being asked. "You going to tell me?" Frank said, settling into his chair across from me. "Or do you want to drink first?" "I'll tell you," I said. I went through it straight. The text messages, Vanessa's response, Derek's message about the cab, Noah's call, Marcus Webb stepping out of that sedan in the patient pickup lane. Frank sat with both hands wrapped around his mug and did not interrupt once, which was one of the things I had always valued most about him. He let a man finish. When I was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Beaumont." "That's what Marcus said. They were going to put you in a facility in Beaumont." He said it again, like he needed to hear it a second time to believe it. "On the day you got out of the hospital." "On the day I got out of the hospital," I confirmed. Frank set his mug down. His jaw had gone tight in a way I recognized. It was the same expression he used to get on the shop floor when a piece of equipment had been misused, and he was deciding how to respond without saying something he would regret. He breathed in through his nose. Then he said very carefully, "Raymond, how much do they stand to get if they control your affairs?" I told him about the house. $1,850,000 at current market value based on what the house 3 doors down had sold for in February. I told him about the savings. He listened without blinking. When I finished, he stood up, went to the counter and refilled his mug, even though it was still more than half full. That was Frank's version of needing a moment. "There's something else," Noah said from the doorway. He had been leaning against the frame quiet enough that I had almost forgotten he was in the room. "Show him, Grandpa." I put Maggie's letter on the table. Frank read it standing up, leaning over the table with one hand flat on the surface. He read it twice. When he straightened up, his eyes were red at the corners. "She knew," he said. It was not a question. "She knew," I said. Frank rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. "Gloria used to say Maggie was the smartest person in any room she walked into. I always agreed, but I never said so because I figured you already knew and didn't need me confirming it." He sat back down. "Raymond, what do you need from me?" "A place to stay while I figure out the next steps," I said. "A few days, maybe a week. You can have the upstairs room as long as you need it." He said it without hesitation, the way Frank said most things that mattered. "And I've got something that might help." He stood again and moved to the small desk in the corner of the kitchen, the one covered in papers and hardware store receipts, and the particular organized chaos of a man who lived alone and kept track of things his own way. He came back with a tablet computer and set it on the table facing me. On the screen was a live feed. 4 panels, black and white, slightly grainy the way security camera footage always is at night. The top left panel showed the front porch of my house on Garfield Street. The top right showed this driveway. The bottom left showed the backyard. The bottom right showed the side entrance near the garage. "You gave me access to your system 2 years ago," Frank said. "After that business with the car break-ins on your block. Remember?" I remembered. I had installed the cameras myself and given Frank the login in case anything happened while Maggie and I were traveling. All 4 panels were dark and still. My house sat quiet under the Houston night, every light off the way I had left it 9 days ago when the ambulance had come. Then the bottom right panel flickered. A light. Coming from inside the garage. I leaned forward. Noah came off the wall and stood behind my chair. The 3 of us watched the screen. The light moved, not a flashlight exactly, more like the glow of a phone being used as a torch, sweeping across the garage interior in short arcs. Then the top left panel changed. The front door opened. Two figures stepped onto the porch. Even in the grainy black and white image, I could see that one of them was taller than the other. Derek was 6'1". Vanessa was 5'4". Frank reached over without a word and pressed the record button on the tablet interface. The small red dot appeared in the corner of the screen. My hands were flat on the table. My coffee had gone cold. I watched my children move through my house at 11:47 at night, and I did not look away from the screen for a single second. I did not sleep well. The upstairs room at Frank's house had a window that faced east, and the Houston sunrise came in early and without apology, and I lay on top of the covers for a long time before I accepted that sleep was finished with me for the night. My chest ached in the dull, persistent way it had been aching since March. Not my heart. The cardiologist had confirmed that twice, just the particular weight that settles into a man's ribs when he has lost someone he built his whole life around. I was downstairs before 6. Frank was already at the stove. He put a plate of eggs in front of me without asking what I wanted, which was the right call. And we ate without talking, which was also the right call. Noah came down at 6:30 with his laptop open and his jaw set in a way that told me he had not slept either. He sat down across from me and turned the screen so I could see it. "Mrs. Patterson sent these last night," he said. After we called her, Dorothy Patterson had lived 3 houses down from Maggie and me for going on 16 years. She was 73 years old, sharp as a finishing nail, and the kind of woman who noticed everything on the block and remembered all of it. She had brought us a casserole every week for the first month after Maggie's diagnosis. I had always liked her. The photographs were taken through the slats of her front porch blinds, slightly blurred at the edges, but clear enough. My driveway. 6 cars I did not recognize. The lights in my living room blazing through the front windows well after 9 in the evening. On the lawn, 2 folding tables covered in red plastic tablecloths. Balloons tied to my porch railing. My porch railing with balloons on it while I was lying in a hospital bed 9 days into a cardiac monitoring stay. I set my fork down. When was this? My voice came out flat. 3 weeks ago, Noah said. Derek's son's birthday. His wife posted about it. He turned the laptop back toward himself and pulled up a second image. A social media post, a woman I recognized as Derek's wife, holding a cake, smiling broadly, my fireplace visible in the background behind her. The caption read, "Surprise birthday weekend for our little guy. So grateful for family and space to celebrate. Space to celebrate. My living room, my fireplace, my house where Maggie had hosted 39 Thanksgivings, and where her reading chair was still angled toward the window exactly the way she had left it." Frank put his coffee mug down on the counter hard enough to make a sound. He did not say anything. He did not need to. "Derek told me the house was fine," I said. "He texted me. I have it right here." I picked up my phone and found the message, sent on a Thursday evening 3 weeks prior. "House is fine, Dad. Rest up." I read it out loud. The words tasted like something left out too long. Noah closed the laptop. "There's something else I need to tell you. About the video call." I looked at him. He folded his hands on the table the way he did when he was about to say something he had been carrying for a while. "When Aunt Vanessa called you in the hospital, the video call about 10 days ago. You remember it?" I remembered it. Vanessa had called on a Sunday afternoon. She had been warm, almost unusually warm, asking about my meals, whether the nurses were attentive, whether I was sleeping. I had thought at the time that grief was finally softening something in her. I had been grateful for it. "I was in the room," Noah said, "standing just outside the door. You couldn't see me on your screen." He stopped, exhaled. "Grandpa," she had her phone propped against the window ledge. Her own phone separate from the tablet she was talking to you on. It was recording. The eggs on my plate had gone cold. I noticed this distantly, the way you notice small things when your mind is working on something larger. She was recording me, I said. The angle was aimed at your face, your hands, the way you were sitting. Noah's voice was careful, and even the way it got when he was controlling something underneath it. I walked in and moved a magazine rack in front of it, pretended I was tidying up. She didn't react, but she ended the call about 4 minutes later. I thought about that Sunday afternoon. I had been tired. The medication made me slow in the mornings, and I had not fully shaken it by midday. I had probably repeated myself once or twice. I had fumbled with the tablet, getting it positioned right. I had squinted at the screen because the light in the room was difficult, and my reading glasses were on the nightstand. I thought about someone watching that footage and deciding what story it told. She was building something, I said. Yes, Noah said. To show a doctor or a lawyer. My stomach had gone hard and cold the same way it used to feel on the shop floor when you realized a machine had been running wrong for long enough that the damage was going to be significant. To show someone who could look at an old man squinting at a screen and call it evidence. Noah did not answer, which was answer enough. Frank came back to the table and sat down. He had been listening from the counter. He looked at me steadily and said, Raymond, these people are not confused or grieving or in over their heads. They planned this. More than once from more than one direction. He leaned forward. Which means you need to stop thinking about this like a family problem and start thinking about it like what it actually is. I looked at my hands on the table. 68 years old. 31 years of machines and metal and problems that had a right answer if you looked at them long enough and carefully enough. Maggie's letter sitting upstairs on the nightstand. $43,000 in an account with my grandson's name on it. What is it actually? I asked, though I already knew. Frank did not hesitate. It's a job, he said. And you've never walked away from one of those in your life. I picked up my fork. The eggs were cold, but I ate them anyway, because wasting food was a habit I had never been able to afford and had never managed to shake. When I was done, I pushed the plate aside and said, Pull up the camera footage from last night, all 47 minutes. I want to watch the whole thing. Noah opened the laptop again. Frank refilled both our coffees, and the three of us sat at that kitchen table in the early Houston morning and got to work. We had been watching the footage for 20 minutes when Noah's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it and went very still. Grandpa, he said. Mrs. Patterson just sent something. He turned the phone toward me. The image loaded slowly on the screen the way images do on older phones with slow connections top to bottom revealing itself in strips. And with each strip, I understood a little more of what I was looking at until the whole picture was there, and I pushed back from the table and stood up because sitting down no longer felt like something I was capable of. My garage. The side door standing open, and arranged along the curb in front of my house, laid out in rows with the particular carelessness of people who have decided something has no value, was every tool I owned. 40 years of accumulated equipment. The socket set I had bought with my first real paycheck from the shop in 1983. The torque wrench I had saved 3 months to afford. The hydraulic jack I had used to teach Derek how to change a tire when he was 15, standing in the driveway on a Saturday morning, while Maggie brought us lemonade. Neither of us drank because we were too focused on getting the lug nuts torqued to the right specification. All of it sitting on the curb in the early morning light with a piece of cardboard propped against the largest toolbox that read in Derek's handwriting, Free. Frank, I said. My voice did not sound like my voice. Frank was already on his feet. He looked at the phone screen, and the muscle in his jaw jumped twice. He breathed out through his nose long and slow and said something very quiet that I will not repeat here. Noah was already typing. "I'm calling Mrs. Patterson right now." Dorothy Patterson answered on the second ring, which told me she had been waiting for the call. Her voice was sharp and clear and furious on Raymond's behalf, in the particular way of a woman who has lived long enough to recognize an injustice when she sees one standing on a public curb. "I saw them doing it at 6 this morning," she said loud enough that Frank could hear her from across the table. "Two men I didn't recognize carrying things out of your garage like they were hauling trash. I took pictures right away. I didn't know who to call first, so I called the non-emergency police line, and then I called Noah." "Did the police come?" Noah asked. "A young officer came by around 7, took a report. Said since the items were on public property, there wasn't much he could do immediately, but that the owner could file a civil claim." She paused. "Raymond, I want you to know that half this block was out there within an hour. Carl from number 42 recognized your toolbox. He posted on the neighborhood app. People started showing up. I sat back down. My legs had made the decision for me." "Showing up," I repeated. To collect your things," Mrs. Patterson said, and her voice had something in it that made my throat close. "Nobody wanted strangers walking off with your equipment. People knew those tools were yours. Raymond, your name is scratched into half of them. You used to lend things to everyone on this street, and you never once asked for anything back, and people remember that kind of thing, whether you think they do or not." I pressed the heel of my hand against my eyes. Frank put a fresh mug of coffee in front of me, which was the only thing he could do and exactly the right thing to do. Noah drove us over 20 minutes later. I sat in the passenger seat and watched my street come into view and felt something happen in my chest that I could not entirely categorize: rage and grief and something that was almost gratitude, all three at once pressing against each other in a space that was not quite big enough to hold them. The curb was empty. The tools were gone, but Carl from number 42 was sitting on my porch steps with 3 cardboard boxes stacked beside him, and Mrs. Patterson was standing in her driveway with a canvas tote bag over each arm, and 2 other neighbors I recognized were coming down the sidewalk carrying equipment they had gathered from their own garages, where they had been keeping it safe. Mrs. Patterson walked over to Noah's car before I had fully opened the door. She was a small woman with white hair and sharp brown eyes, and the kind of posture that comes from decades of refusing to let anything bow her. She held out both canvas bags and said, "I got to your toolbox before anyone else. I recognized your name on the side." I took the bags. They were heavier than they looked. "There's a wrench at the bottom of the left one," she said. Her voice dropped slightly. "It has 2 names on it. I thought it might be important." I reached into the bag and found it by feel before I found it by sight. The familiar weight, the specific balance of it in my hand. The way it settled into my grip like something that had been shaped exactly for that purpose. I pulled it out. Maggie had given it to me the Christmas after we were married. A Craftsman combination wrench 12-inch with both our names engraved along the handle in letters small enough that you had to hold it close to read them. Raymond and Margaret Cole. December 1985. Derek had thrown it away without looking at what it was. He had carried it out of my garage and set it on a public curb with a free sign and walked back inside my house and had not thought about it again. I held the wrench in both hands. The metal was cold from sitting outside in the morning air. I turned it over once. Frank stepped up beside me. He did not say anything. He put one hand briefly on my shoulder, and then he moved away because Frank understood that some moments require presence and not words. Mrs. Patterson was watching me with the careful attention of someone who knows they are witnessing something private, but cannot look away. After a moment, she said very quietly, "Maggie showed me that wrench once, years ago, told me the story behind it. I looked up at her. She said you kept it in the garage because you wanted it close to the work," she said. She said that was the most Raymond Cole thing about you she had ever seen. Her voice caught slightly on the last word. She pressed her lips together and lifted her chin. I think she was right. I thanked her. I thanked Carl and the others. I thanked all of them in the inadequate way that you thank people when what you actually feel is too large for the words available. And I carried the wrench back to Noah's car and held it in my lap the entire drive back to Frank's house. The call from Reverend Thomas came in just after 2 in the afternoon, 3 days after I had moved into Frank's upstairs room. I was sitting at the kitchen table with Maggie's letter open in front of me, reading it for the 4th time, when my phone lit up with a number I recognized from 20 years of Sunday mornings. Reverend Gerald Thomas had been the pastor at St. Andrew's Community Church since before Maggie and I had started attending. He was 67 years old, soft-spoken in the way of a man who had learned that a quiet voice made people lean in rather than tune out, and he had sat with Maggie through 4 separate stretches of difficult treatment with the patience of someone who genuinely believed that presence was its own form of prayer. I trusted him the way I trusted Frank, completely and without reservation. "Raymond," he said, and the way he said my name told me immediately that this was not a social call. "I need to tell you something, and I want to say first that I debated calling for 2 days before I decided you had a right to know." I put the letter down. "Go ahead, Gerald." He told me about the check. Maggie had written it in February, 6 weeks before she passed, during one of her clearer afternoons when the medication was sitting right, and she had insisted on getting her affairs in order. $15,000 made out to the St. Andrew's Community Outreach Fund, which provided groceries and utility assistance to families in the surrounding neighborhood. She had handed it to him personally during a visit, told him to deposit it after she was gone, and made him promise not to mention it to the family beforehand because she did not want it to become a discussion. "So I deposited it the week after the service," Reverend Thomas said. "The bank called me 4 days later. The check had been returned, flagged by a stop payment order." He paused. "Raymond, someone contacted the bank claiming to be an authorized representative of the estate and submitted paperwork requesting the payment be reversed. The bank complied because the documentation appeared legitimate." My hand tightened around the phone. "What kind of documentation?" I asked. "A letter of authorization," he said carefully, with what appeared to be a notarized signature from a family representative. "I have a copy the bank sent me. Raymond, I have looked at it a number of times, and I am not a legal expert, but the signature does not look right to me." I asked him to photograph it and send it to Noah's number. He did so while we were still on the call. Noah opened the image and set the phone on the table between us. Frank leaned over to look. None of us spoke for a moment. The signature on the letter of authorization belonged to Vanessa Cole, listed as executor of the estate of Margaret Cole. There were 2 problems with that. The first was that Maggie's estate had not yet gone through probate, which meant no executor had been formally appointed by any Texas court. The second was that Maggie's will, which Diane Holloway held in her office safe, named me as executor, not Vanessa, not Derek, and not anyone else. Submitting false documentation to a financial institution to redirect or block a payment is bank fraud under federal law. It does not matter how much money is involved. It does not matter if the person believed they had some claim to the funds. What matters is that a false document was presented to a bank as legitimate, and the bank acted on it. Gerald Hikesmay, I said. Keep that copy somewhere safe. Don't discuss it with anyone outside this conversation. Already done, he said. Raymond, I am sorry. Maggie wanted that money to go to families who needed it. The idea that someone would intercept it. He stopped. When he continued, his voice had lost some of its usual steadiness. She talked about that fund the last time I saw her. She said she hoped it would help someone the way this community had helped your family over the years. After I ended the call, I sat for a long moment with my hand flat on the table. Frank refilled my coffee without being asked. Noah was already on his phone, and I could tell from the set of his shoulders that he was composing a message to Diane Holloway. Then Noah's phone rang. He looked at the screen, and something shifted in his face. "It's a Dr. Sheila Marsh," he said, "from St. Catherine's." He put it on speaker. Dr. Sheila Marsh introduced herself quickly and precisely, attending Physician Internal Medicine, St. Catherine Medical Center, 9 years on staff. She had a direct way of speaking that I recognized as the voice of someone who delivered difficult information regularly and had learned to do it without softening it into meaninglessness. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I want to be clear that I am not calling in any official capacity. I am calling because I believe something happened to your medical record during your stay that you deserve to know about." She explained it carefully. A document had been inserted into my patient file approximately 6 days into my stay, a cognitive assessment form, the kind used to evaluate orientation and executive function in patients presenting with potential neurological concerns. The form was dated correctly. The attending physician's signature on it was not hers and did not belong to any physician she recognized as having been assigned to my case. She had flagged it with the hospital's compliance office. She had also, she said, made 3 copies of the original unaltered file, one for compliance, one for her own records, and one that she was prepared to provide to my legal representative upon request. "Dr. Marsh," I said, "why are you calling me directly?" A brief pause. "Because I have been doing this for 9 years," she said, "and I know what a legitimate cognitive assessment looks like, and what a document that was added to a file after the fact looks like. And because you were my patient, Mr. Cole, that still means something to me." I thanked her. I wrote down her direct number on the back of an envelope. When I set the pen down, my hand was not shaking, but it wanted to. Not from fear this time. From something colder and more deliberate than fear. Frank looked at me across the table. "2 calls in 1 afternoon," he said. "3 directions," I said. "The taxi, the video call, the medical record, and now the check." I picked up the wrench from where I had set it on the table when the first call came in. I turned it over in my hands once. "They didn't do this in a day, Frank. This took planning." Frank nodded slowly. "Which means you need to stop reacting and start moving." I set the wrench down. "Call Diane Holloway," I told Noah. "Tell her we need to meet. All of it, the check, the medical record, the footage, Marcus Webb's recording. Everything." Noah was already dialing before I finished the sentence. Frank had kept everything. That was the thing about Frank DeLuca that most people did not understand until they needed it. He was not a sentimental man in the conventional sense. Did not keep photographs in frames or birthday cards in drawers. But he kept paperwork the way some men keep firearms, with the conviction that you never knew when you were going to need it, and the certainty that you would regret it deeply if you did not have it when the moment came. He came downstairs the morning after our calls with Diane Holloway, carrying a cardboard box that had once held copy paper and now held 11 years of financial documents, bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, personal check carbons, and annotated receipts that he had kept at my request. when I had not wanted them in my own house where Maggie might find them and worry. He set the box on the kitchen table and said, "I figured this day was coming eventually." I looked at him. "You kept all of it." "Every page," he said. 11 years. We spread everything across the table in chronological order, which took the better part of an hour and required moving the coffee mugs to the counter and using the chairs as additional surface space. Noah sat at one end with his laptop entering figures into a spreadsheet as we identified each document, because Noah had the kind of organized mind that turned chaos into columns and rows and found comfort in the process. The first payment to Derek had been in 2013, $42,000 wired directly to a brokerage account to cover margin calls after a series of technology stock positions had gone badly against him. Derek had called me on a Thursday evening and explained the situation in the clipped, embarrassed way of a man who has convinced himself that asking for help is the same as admitting failure. I had told him not to worry about it. I had not told Maggie the full amount. That had been the first time. Over the next 6 years, there had been 9 more. Some were smaller, $8,000 here, $12,000 there, covering a business loan that had come due ahead of schedule, a tax liability that had surprised him a period of 6 months when his income had dropped sharply and his mortgage had not. The largest single payment had been $71,000 in 2017 when a real estate investment partnership he had entered with 2 colleagues had dissolved badly, and he had been left holding obligations he could not meet alone. In total, across 11 years and 10 separate transactions, I had directed $187,000 toward my son's financial problems. He had never once asked how I managed it. He had never once asked what it cost me. He had said thank you twice that I could remember, both times briefly and in contexts where saying thank you was the path of least resistance. To $187,000, Noah said quietly. He was looking at his spreadsheet. He said the number the way you say something that does not feel real yet. "Keep going," I said. Vanessa's side of the ledger was different in character, if not in scale. She had never needed cash infusions the way Derek had. Her problems had been more specific, more acute, and considerably more expensive per incident. The divorce attorney in 2015 had cost $94,000 over 14 months, which I had covered by drawing down a significant portion of my retirement account and absorbing the early withdrawal penalty, because the alternative was watching my daughter navigate a genuinely ugly legal proceeding without adequate representation. I had told her we had simply decided to move some money around. She had accepted this explanation without asking further questions, which told me everything I needed to know about how carefully she had been paying attention. The second item was a personal guarantee I had signed in 2019, pledging $76,000 of my pension income as collateral against a small business loan Vanessa had taken to fund a consulting practice she was starting. The business had not performed as projected. The loan had required servicing for 3 years before she had refinanced it under better terms. During those 3 years, a portion of my monthly pension disbursement had been directed to the loan servicer before it ever reached my bank account. Maggie had noticed the reduced deposits. I had told her the pension administrator had adjusted the payment schedule. She had written it down in her notebook without comment. I had believed at the time that she accepted the explanation. Reading her letter again the night before, I understood that she had not accepted it at all. She had simply decided not to make me defend it. $94,000 for the attorney, Noah said. $76,000 on the guarantee. That's $170,000 on Vanessa's side. $170,000, I confirmed. He typed for a moment. Grandpa, combined with Derek's side, you gave them $357,000 over 11 years. He looked up from the screen. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. And they were trying to put you in a facility in Beaumont. Frank was standing at the counter with his arms crossed, looking at the spread of documents on his kitchen table with the expression of a man calculating tolerances. "What are you going to do with all of this?" he asked. I had been thinking about that since the night before, turning it over. The way I used to turn a difficult repair over before I committed to a course of action, examining it from every angle, looking for the approach that was most direct and least likely to cause additional damage. "I am going to put it in an envelope," I said. "Everything. The full accounting. Every transaction, every date, every amount. And I am going to mail it to both of them with one sentence at the bottom." Frank waited. "Dad's paid enough," I said. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Outside, a car passed on Elmwood Street. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started up, which was the sound of a Tuesday morning in a Houston neighborhood, where life was proceeding normally, while mine was doing something else entirely. Noah closed his laptop. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "Do you want me to print the summary page?" "Print 2 copies," I said. "One for each of them." He opened the laptop again. Frank uncrossed his arms and picked up his coffee mug. I set the wrench back on the table and began sorting the documents into 2 equal stacks. One for Derek and one for Vanessa, working with the same methodical attention I had applied to every job worth doing in 31 years of shop work. Some problems you fixed by making noise. Some you fixed by making a record and letting the record speak for itself. This was the second kind. Noah mailed the envelopes on a Wednesday morning, while Frank and I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open between us and the footage from the night of the break-in loaded and ready. We had watched portions of it before in fragments the night it happened. This time I wanted to watch all 47 minutes without stopping. Frank poured 2 coffees. He set them down and pulled his chair around, so we were both facing the screen. He did not say anything about what we were about to watch. He just sat down and nodded once, which was his way of saying he was ready when I was. I pressed play. The timestamp in the corner read 11:47 p.m. The footage was black and white, slightly grainy in the way of residential security cameras, but the resolution was adequate. I had installed a decent system, not the cheapest one on the shelf, because cheap equipment failed when you needed it, and I had spent too many years around machinery to trust anything that had not been built to last. The side door of the garage opened first. The figure that came through it was taller, which meant Derek. He moved with the particular careful slowness of someone who believes they are being quiet, but is not actually practiced at it. Too deliberate, too aware of his own footsteps. He swept his phone flashlight across the garage interior in short arcs, and even in the grainy black and white I could see the beam passing over the empty space where my toolboxes had stood that morning, before his hired men had carried them to the curb. He had already done that before coming back at night. He had cleared the garage of my tools in the daylight, and then returned in the dark to go through the house. I sat with that understanding for a moment, letting it settle. Vanessa came through the front door at 11:52. She moved faster than Derek with less hesitation, which told me she had thought about the layout of the house beforehand. She went directly down the hallway toward my office without pausing to look at anything else, which meant she knew what she was looking for and where I typically kept important documents. I watched her open the office door. The camera angle from the hallway showed her silhouette moving inside the flashlight beam, swinging across the desk. The filing cabinet, the bookshelf along the far wall. Then she found the filing cabinet. She tried the top drawer first locked, because I had always kept it locked, a habit from the shop, where every machine had a lockout procedure, and every important component had a designated secure position. She tried something small from her jacket pocket. A key, or possibly a pick. The resolution did not allow me to be certain. The drawer opened on the second attempt. I watched her hands move through the files. She pulled several folders, flipped through them, replaced them. Then she found the green hanging folder near the back of the drawer, where I kept correspondence related to the house insurance documents, the original mortgage papers, property tax records. She pulled a blue envelope from it and held it up to her flashlight. She stood there for 4 seconds, reading whatever was visible through the envelope. Then she put it in her jacket. Beside me, Frank exhaled slowly through his nose. "That's the envelope," I said. "What was in it?" Frank asked. "Nothing," I said. He turned to look at me. "I moved everything that mattered to Diane Holloway's office in January," I said. "Before Maggie passed. The trust documents, the will, the insurance policies, everything. That envelope had been sitting in the filing cabinet for 4 months, with nothing in it but a blank sheet of paper." Frank stared at me for a moment. Then a sound came out of him that was halfway between a laugh and something else entirely. "You moved it all in January." "Maggie asked me to," I said. "She made the appointment with Diane herself and told me we were going to sign some papers. I did not ask questions. I just went and signed where Diane pointed." So Vanessa spent 4 months planning to steal a blank piece of paper. Apparently. On the screen, Vanessa walked back down the hallway to where Derek was waiting near the front door. She said something to him. The camera had no audio, but from the movement of her hands, I could tell she believed she had found what she came for. Derek nodded. He appeared relieved. They left through the front door at 12:34 a.m., pulling it closed behind them, but not locking the deadbolt, which told me they had not thought past the retrieval itself to what would come after. I reached over and stopped the playback. The kitchen was quiet. Outside on Elmwood Street, a dog was barking at something 3 houses down, with the rhythmic persistence of a dog that has decided this is now its primary occupation for the evening. "She thinks she has it," Frank said. "She thinks she has it," I confirmed. "Which means she is going to do something with what she thinks she has." He leaned back in his chair. "Sooner rather than later. She is not a patient person." I picked up my coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but I drank it anyway. Diane said the same thing when Noah called her. She said whoever is moving against a trust in Texas needs to file in probate court within a specific window, and that window was going to open up once the estate proceedings began formally. I set the mug down. "She said we should expect a move within 30 days. Frank nodded slowly. "So we wait." "We wait," I said, "and we make sure everything is in order before she makes hers." I called Diane Holloway directly after that. She answered on the second ring, and I told her about the footage, the timeline, what Vanessa had taken, what the envelope had actually contained. There was a brief silence on her end, and then she said in the measured tone of a woman who had been practicing estate law in Texas for 22 years. "Raymond, I want you to send me that footage today. All 47 minutes. "Noah will send it this afternoon," I said. "Good." Another pause. "Raymond, I need you to understand something. What they took from that envelope was nothing. But the act of taking it on camera at midnight inside a property they had no legal right to enter, that is something. That is actually quite a lot of something." I thanked her and ended the call. Noah had come back from the post office by then and was standing in the kitchen doorway with his jacket still on, listening to the last part of the conversation. "Diane wants the footage," I told him. "Already uploading it," he said, holding up his phone. He had anticipated the request before I made it, which was the kind of thing that made me understand, with a quiet certainty, that sat differently than pride, that Maggie had been right about this boy from the very beginning. I looked at the frozen frame on the laptop screen. Vanessa standing in my hallway at midnight, with an empty envelope in her hand, completely certain she had won something. I closed the laptop. "Now we wait," I said. The video went up on a Thursday morning, 4 days after we mailed the envelopes. Noah found it first. He came downstairs at 7:15 with his phone in his hand and his jaw set in the particular way it got when he had already processed something difficult and was now deciding how to present it to me without making it worse than it was. I was at the kitchen table with my second coffee and the Houston Chronicle that Frank still had delivered to the house every morning out of a habit that went back 30 years. "Grandpa," he said, "Vanessa posted something last night." He set the phone on the table in front of me. The video was 4 minutes and 12 seconds long. The thumbnail showed Vanessa sitting in what appeared to be her living room, soft lighting a box of tissues on the table beside her, positioned with the careful casualness of something that had been arranged to look unarranged. I pressed play. She looked directly into the camera and spoke in a low, unsteady voice that suggested she was either genuinely distressed or had practiced the unsteadiness until it felt natural. She said that she was coming forward because she was frightened for her father. She said that her nephew Noah had been isolating Raymond from his family since the day he was discharged from the hospital, that he had prevented Derek and herself from making contact, that Raymond was a vulnerable elderly man who had recently lost his wife and was not in a condition to be making decisions without proper guidance and support. She used the phrase vulnerable elderly man 3 times in 4 minutes. She did not mention the taxi. She did not mention Beaumont. She did not mention the filing cabinet, the envelope, the stop payment on Maggie's charity check, the altered medical record, or the $187,000 she and her brother had accepted from me over the previous 11 years. She mentioned none of those things, which told me she believed she was still ahead of the information and that we had not yet assembled what we had. By midday, the video had several hundred comments. The majority were sympathetic to Vanessa. Several people tagged elder abuse hotlines in the comments. One person wrote a paragraph about how common financial exploitation of elderly people by younger relatives had become, which struck me as ironic in a way I did not find particularly funny. Frank read the comments over my shoulder and made a sound low in his throat. "She knows what she is doing," he said. "She always did," I said. "She got that from Maggie. The difference is what she decided to do with it." Noah had been sitting across from me watching my face while I read the comments. He had not touched his coffee. His hands were flat on the table, and he was very still in the way of someone who is controlling something underneath the stillness. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I looked at him. 26 years old, sitting at Frank DeLuca's kitchen table with a video calling him a predator circulating on the internet, and he was asking me what I wanted to do. Not defending himself. Not reaching for his phone to draft a response. Asking me. "What do you want to do?" I said back to him. He considered that for a moment. Then he said, "Nothing. Same thing you always did when somebody came at you sideways. Nothing, and keep working." Something moved in my chest that I did not have a clean word for. Pride was part of it. Grief was part of it, because the voice I heard underneath his words was Maggie's voice. The same patience she had carried through 40 years of living with a man who processed everything slowly and said less than he meant, and trusted time more than he trusted noise. "That is exactly right," I said. I called Diane Holloway at 9 that morning. She had already seen the video. She told me not to respond publicly under any circumstances, that any statement from Noah or myself would be framed as defensive and would only extend the story's reach. She said the video would work against Vanessa in a courtroom context because it established a pattern of behavior and demonstrated that Vanessa was willing to make public claims without evidence. "Let her talk," Diane said. "Every word she puts on the internet is a document. And documents have a way of showing up in discovery. Discovery in legal terms is the process by which both sides in a civil or probate dispute are required to share relevant evidence with each other before trial. If Vanessa filed any action against the trust or against Noah, she would be required to disclose her communications, her financial records, and the documentation behind any claims she made. Every public statement she made now would be measured against what she could actually prove. She is building a case in public, Diane continued, because she cannot build one in court. Those are two very different things, and judges understand the difference. I thanked her and ended the call. Noah was watching me from across the table. Diane says let her talk, I told him. He nodded slowly. Grandma used to say something like that. She said the people who needed everyone to believe their version of a story were usually the people whose version couldn't stand up to a question. I picked up my coffee. Outside on Elmwood Street, a garbage truck was working its way down the block, the mechanical groaning of the compressor audible through the kitchen window. The sound of an ordinary Thursday morning in a neighborhood that did not know or care about Vanessa's video or my filing cabinet, or the blank piece of paper in the blue envelope. That evening I did the only thing I had left to do that day. I took Maggie's letter out of the nightstand drawer and read it again from the beginning. Not because I had forgotten what it said, because reading her handwriting was the closest thing I had to hearing her voice, and there were moments when I needed that more than I needed anything else. She had written near the end of the second page, "You have never once needed anyone to believe you, Ray. You have just done the work and let it speak. Don't stop doing that now. The truth is a slow thing, but it always gets there." I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I turned off the light and lay in the dark in Frank's upstairs room and listened to the neighborhood settle into night around me, and thought about slow things that always got there eventually. I slept better than I had in weeks. I was in the garage when he came. Frank's garage was a narrower, more cluttered version of my own. The same smell of motor oil and metal shavings, the same arrangement of tools along a pegboard wall that told you everything you needed to know about how a man thought, the same quality of light that came through a single high window and landed flat on the concrete floor. I had asked Frank that morning if I could spend some time in there, and he had said yes without asking why, because he understood that some men think best when their hands have something to do. I was cleaning a set of wrenches that did not need cleaning when I heard tires on the driveway. I set down the rag and walked to the side door and looked out. A dark sedan, the same one from the hospital pickup lane 6 weeks earlier. Marcus Webb sat in it for a moment before he got out. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, with close-cut gray at his temples, and the kind of face that had learned to give very little away. He got out slowly, the way men get out of cars when they are not sure what kind of reception they are walking into, and stood beside the sedan and looked at the garage door. I stepped out. He saw me, and something moved in his expression. Not relief exactly, more like a man who has made a decision he is not entirely sure about and has gone past the point of turning back. He was holding his phone in one hand down at his side, not raised, just present. "Mr. Cole," he said. "I called Noah yesterday," Marcus said. "I had something I should have given you sooner." He paused and looked down at his phone. After I realized what Vanessa had asked me to do, I was scared of getting involved. But when I saw her accusing you publicly, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. "Come inside," I said. Frank was at the kitchen table when we came in. He looked at Marcus the way he looked at any new variable in a situation he was already tracking carefully, without expression, reserving judgment until he had more information. Noah came down from upstairs at the sound of voices taking the steps 2 at a time. Marcus sat down at the table. He set his phone on the surface between us and looked at it for a moment before he looked at me. "You remember the night on Route 10, he said. It was not a question. "July 2019, I said. Your alternator. He nodded. I was 3 hours from having the car repossessed. I had 2 weeks of work lined up and no way to get to any of it if that car didn't run. He looked at the phone again. You wouldn't take a dime. You wouldn't even let me buy you a coffee from the gas station up the road. You just fixed it and told me to pay it forward. I meant it, I said. I know you did, he said. That's the part that made it hard to take this job when she called. He picked up the phone. He navigated to an audio file and placed the phone back on the table facing me. Vanessa Cole called me 8 days before your discharge date. She had gotten my number from the car service directory. I do airport runs sometimes, and she'd used the service before. He pressed play. Vanessa's voice came out of the small speaker clearly enough. She spoke with the brisk efficiency of someone giving instructions to a contractor, specific, detailed, and completely certain that she would be obeyed. She told Marcus the pickup location, St. Catherine Medical Center patient discharge entrance. She told him the date and approximate time. She told him that her father was an elderly man recovering from a cardiac episode and that the family had arranged for him to be transferred directly to a private care facility called Meadowbrook Residential in Beaumont. She told him the address. Then she said the part that made Frank put his coffee mug down on the counter with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. He may resist, Vanessa said on the recording. He gets confused sometimes and he doesn't always understand what's best for him. Do not stop regardless of what he says. If he asks to call someone, tell him you'll stop in a few minutes and then don't stop. The facility is expecting him by 8, and I need him there. The recording ended. The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on Elmwood Street. Noah's jaw was tight enough that I could see the muscle working. He had heard the recording before he had spoken to Marcus the previous day, but hearing it again in the same room as me was clearly a different experience for him. His hands were pressed flat on the table and he was breathing through his nose in the measured way of someone who has decided that what they feel right now does not get to be the loudest thing in the room. I looked at Marcus. She told you he gets confused, I said. She used those words. Yes, sir, Marcus said. He met my eyes directly. Mr. Cole, I took that job because I needed the money and because she sounded credible on the phone. I drove most of the way to the hospital before I started thinking about what she'd actually said. His voice dropped slightly. Nobody tells a driver not to stop if the passenger asks to call someone unless they know the passenger is going to ask. She knew you'd want to make a call. She planned for it. He was right. She had planned for the possibility that I would be frightened and would want to contact someone, and had given the driver instructions to prevent it. She had paid a man to override my choices on what was supposed to be a private car ride. Why did you call Noah instead of just driving away? I asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because you didn't just fix my alternator on Route 10. You talked to me for 3 hours on the side of that highway, like I was somebody worth talking to. You asked me about my kids. You remembered the name of my youngest when you said goodbye. He looked at the phone on the table. A man who does that doesn't deserve what she was describing. The kitchen stayed quiet. Frank was looking at the pegboard on the wall, the way he looked at things when he was thinking about something he wasn't ready to say yet. Noah had unclenched his hands and was looking at Marcus with an expression that was not quite gratitude, but was the thing just adjacent to it. I reached across the table and picked up Marcus's phone. Can you send this file to Noah's number? I asked. Already did, Noah said quietly from across the table. Last night, it's in Diane's inbox as of 6 this morning. I set the phone back down. I looked at Marcus Webb, 50 years old, sitting at a stranger's kitchen table because a man he barely knew had once spent 3 hours on the shoulder of Route 10 treating him like he mattered. Thank you, I said. It came out rough at the edges. Marcus nodded once. He picked up his phone and stood. He looked like he wanted to say something more, but had decided the moment did not need it. He was right about that. Some things land cleaner without an extra word attached. Frank walked him to the door. I stayed at the table and looked at Noah. Diane has everything now, I said. Everything, Noah confirmed. I picked up the wrench from the corner of the table. I turned it once in my hands and set it back down. Outside on Elmwood Street, the afternoon was moving toward evening, the light going amber through the kitchen window, and somewhere across this city, Vanessa Cole was waiting for something she had already lost without knowing it. Diane Holloway called on a Tuesday morning in July, 3 weeks after Marcus Webb had sat at Frank's kitchen table and handed us the recording. I was upstairs when the phone rang, sitting on the edge of the bed, with Maggie's notebook open in my lap. I had not read it yet. I had been holding it for 10 minutes, running my thumb along the spiral, binding the way you run your thumb along something familiar when you need to remind yourself that certain things are still solid. I picked up on the second ring. Raymond, Diane said. They just showed up at the property. I stood up. How many of them? Vanessa and 2 men I don't recognize. One of them is carrying a document case. I'm looking at them from my car across the street. A brief pause. She's brought a lawyer, Raymond, or someone who looks like one. I told her to call me back when it was over. She said she would do better than that. She was going to walk over and handle it herself, and she would have me on the phone the entire time so I could hear everything. I told her to go ahead. I sat back down on the edge of the bed. I held the phone against my ear and listened. I heard the sound of a car door, heels on pavement. Then Diane's voice, slightly louder, taking on the particular clarity of a woman who has practiced projecting authority in professional settings for 2 decades. Good morning, can I help you? Vanessa's voice, cooler than I remembered it from the recording, more controlled. We're here on behalf of the Cole family estate. We have documentation authorizing us to secure the property pending probate proceedings. I see, Diane said pleasantly. And you are Vanessa Cole, daughter of Raymond Cole, the current title holder. I understand. And your documentation, may I see it? A pause. The sound of a document case being opened. Papers exchanged. Thank you, Diane said. Another pause, longer this time. I imagined her reading through whatever Vanessa had brought, taking her time with it, giving nothing away in her expression. Diane had told me once that the most useful thing she had learned in 22 years of estate law was that the person who speaks first after a silence usually loses ground they did not need to give up. Then Diane said, I'm afraid there's a problem with this. Vanessa's voice sharpened by a degree. What kind of problem? The property you're referencing, the residence at 417 Garfield Street, is not part of Raymond Cole's personal estate. It hasn't been since January 14th of this year. More paper sounds. I have the documentation here if you'd like to review it. The property was transferred into the Cole Family Preservation Trust on that date. It was witnessed, notarized, and recorded with the Harris County Clerk's Office the following week. A pause. The trust holds the property for a term of 20 years, during which it cannot be sold, transferred, or encumbered without the consent of the named trustee. Complete silence on the line. The kind of silence that has weight to it. That's not possible, Vanessa said. Her voice had lost some of its coolness. My father never mentioned any trust. He wasn't required to, Diane said, and her voice was entirely pleasant, entirely steady, entirely without apology. A property owner in Texas may establish a revocable living trust and transfer assets into it at any time without notifying family members. It is entirely legal and entirely private. Your father and your mother signed the trust documents together. Your mother passed before the trust became irrevocable, at which point the terms locked automatically under Texas law. Another silence. Longer this time. Who is the trustee? Vanessa's voice had gone flat. I am not at liberty to share that information with you today, Diane said. What I can tell you is that the property is legally protected and cannot be accessed, encumbered, or transferred by any party other than the trustee acting within the terms of the trust, which means respectfully that whatever documentation you're holding does not apply to this property. I heard something I could not immediately identify. Then I realized it was the sound of Vanessa exhaling not a sigh. Something harder than that, the sound of air leaving a person who has just understood that the ground they were standing on was not the ground they thought it was. The lawyer with her said something too low to hear clearly. Vanessa said something back to him, sharp and short. Then her footsteps on the pavement, not leaving, just moving. Pacing, I thought. Diane spoke again. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Vanessa did not answer her directly. After a long moment, she said to whoever was with her, "Call Derek." Her voice had lost its professional steadiness entirely. What was underneath it was not anger exactly. It was the sound of someone recalculating very quickly and not liking any of the numbers. Then Diane's voice came back to me more quietly. Raymond, she's stepping away. She's on her phone now. How does she look? I asked. A pause. She's standing on your porch, Diane said. Just standing there, looking at the front door. Another pause. Raymond, I've done this for 22 years. I have watched a lot of people find out that something they counted on isn't there anymore. She's standing very still. I did not say anything for a moment. I looked at the notebook in my lap, at Maggie's handwriting on the cover, at the date she had written in the top right corner of the first page. That's Maggie's porch, I said finally. Yes, Diane said. It is. After the call ended, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The room was quiet. The morning light came through the east window the same way it always did, indifferent and exact. Maggie had sat with Diane Holloway in a law office 4 times while I was at work, while she was fighting a disease that was fighting back, while she was still thinking about what would happen to me when she was no longer here to run interference. She had signed papers that I had signed without fully reading, because I trusted her completely, and she had known I would. She had built a wall around the thing we had made together over 39 years, and she had done it quietly and completely, and without asking for credit. I picked up the wrench from the nightstand where I had started keeping it. I turned it over in my hands. Raymond and Margaret Cole. December 1985. Downstairs, I heard Frank moving around the kitchen. I heard Noah's voice asking Frank something, and Frank answering in his low, deliberate way. The ordinary sounds of a house that had become, without anyone planning it, a place where things were being held together. I put the wrench in my jacket pocket and went downstairs. Diane just called, I told them, and then I told them what she had said. Frank poured 3 coffees. He set them on the table and sat down. He looked at me for a moment, and then he said, Your wife was something else, Raymond. She was, I said. She really was. Noah found it 2 days later, the way he found most things, quietly, without announcing he was looking. He came into the kitchen on a Thursday afternoon, carrying his laptop with the screen already turned toward me, and I could tell from the set of his shoulders that whatever was on it had landed on him hard before he had walked through the door. He set the laptop on the table without a word and stepped back. It was a social media post. Derek's account, posted at 11:47 the previous night, which told me he had written it in the dark, probably alone. Probably after something had been said between him and Vanessa that had pushed him past the point where he could keep it contained. The post had since been deleted. But Noah had taken a screenshot before it disappeared, and someone else had taken one before Noah. And that second screenshot had already been shared 17 times in a neighborhood Facebook group that included 4 people from my street. I read it twice. Derek had written that he wanted to set the record straight about the family situation that was being discussed online. He wrote that he had been unfairly characterized as the architect of a plan that had in fact been entirely conceived and directed by his sister. He wrote that Vanessa had approached him 6 months ago with what she described as a solution to a problem they both recognized, and that he had gone along with it against his better judgment, because she had presented it as something their father would ultimately benefit from. He wrote that the falsified medical assessment had been her idea arranged through her partner, and that he had known about it, but had not been the one to initiate it. He wrote that he was not willing to go to jail for something he had not designed. He had not mentioned the taxi by name. He had not mentioned Beaumont. But he had used the phrase falsified medical assessment in a public post on the internet, which meant it was now a document in the most accessible archive in human history. Frank read it over my shoulder. He straightened up and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he said, "He just handed you everything." "He handed himself everything," I said. "He didn't mean to hand it to me." Noah had set his phone on the table beside the laptop. On the screen was a second screenshot, this one from Vanessa's account, posted 40 minutes after Derek's, and also since deleted, but not before it had been captured by 3 separate people. Vanessa had written that her brother was a liar, who had initiated every aspect of what she called the arrangement, that he had been the one to contact Marcus Webb's car service directly, that he had used company funds that did not belong to him to finance portions of the plan, and that if he wanted to discuss falsified documents in public, he should be prepared to explain the $67,000 he had moved out of a joint family account without her knowledge or consent. I sat with that for a moment. $67,000. A joint account I had not known existed, which meant it had been created specifically for this purpose. Which meant at some point, Derek and Vanessa had sat down together and decided to open a shared account to fund the project of removing me from my own life. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler system came on with a sound like distant applause. Noah sat down across from me. "They took each other apart in 40 minutes, he said. On the internet. With their real names." I did not say anything immediately. I was thinking about something Maggie had written in her notebook, not the letter she had left in the lockbox, but the notebook Noah had brought me 3 weeks earlier. She had written it 2 years before she got sick on a regular Tuesday in October, the kind of entry she made when something had occurred to her that she wanted to hold on to. She had written, "The thing about people who are doing something wrong is that they can only hold it together as long as they trust each other. The moment that trust breaks, they stop protecting the secret and start protecting themselves. And protecting yourself always makes more noise than protecting a secret does." I had read that entry 6 times since Noah gave me the notebook. I had not known when I first whether she had written it about Derek and Vanessa specifically, or about some general truth she had observed in her years of watching people. After this morning, it did not matter which. "Grandpa," Noah said carefully. "Are you okay?" I looked at him. His face had the taut, watchful quality it took on when he was trying to gauge how much something had hit me without asking directly. He had Maggie's eyes, which made the expression land differently than it might have from anyone else. "I taught them both better than this." I said. The words came out quieter than I intended. Noah did not offer a correction or a reassurance. He just held my gaze and said, I know. No, I said. I mean, I actually believed it worked. I believed that somewhere underneath everything they had learned what Maggie and I were trying to show them. I stopped. The sprinkler outside had moved to a different section of the lawn. That's the part I have been sitting with. Not what they did. What I missed. Frank came back to the table. He had been standing at the counter with his back to us, looking out the small window above the sink that faced the backyard. He turned around and looked at me with the directness of a man who had decided the moment required something more than coffee. Raymond, he said, you didn't miss anything. You did everything right and they made choices you couldn't make for them. He sat down. You're not responsible for who they decided to become. You're only responsible for who you decide to be now. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. The refrigerator, the sprinkler, the ordinary percussion of a Thursday afternoon in a house on Elmwood Street. I picked up my coffee. It was lukewarm. I drank it anyway because wasting things had never been something I could make myself do, and because the physical act of doing something ordinary with my hands helped me think, which was something Maggie had always understood about me and had never once tried to change. Send the screenshots to Diane, I said. Already sent, Noah said. An hour ago. I set the mug down. I looked at the 2 deleted posts on the laptop screen, the residue of 40 minutes in which my children had dismantled each other's credibility in public, because the pressure of keeping a shared secret had finally exceeded their capacity to maintain a united front. A family does not break apart in a single moment. I understood that more clearly sitting at Frank's kitchen table than I had ever understood it before. It breaks in all the small places where people choose convenience over honesty and entitlement, over gratitude and self-protection, over the people who would have protected them without being asked. It breaks in the moments you do not notice until you are looking back at them from a very long distance. What happens now? Noah asked. Now, I said. We wait for Vanessa to make one more move. I already knew what it would be. I had known since the night Frank and I had watched the footage, and I had seen her put the empty envelope in her jacket, with the absolute confidence of someone who believes they have outmaneuvered a situation they do not fully understand. She had one card left to play. She was going to play it, and when she did, I was going to be ready. Diane called on a Monday afternoon in the last week of July, and I knew from the first syllable that the card had been played. I was at Frank's kitchen table doing what I had spent most of the past 2 months doing, reading, waiting, thinking through the kinds of problems that do not have a torque specification or a clearance measurement, but require the same patience as the ones that do. Frank was in the garage. Noah was upstairs. The house had settled into the particular quiet of a weekday afternoon when nothing is happening yet, and everything is about to. Raymond, Diane said. Vanessa just filed something with the probate court. You need to hear this. Go ahead, I said. She read it to me in full, which was the right call. I had told her from the beginning that I wanted complete information, not summaries, not softened versions, just the thing itself. It was a petition to the probate court claiming that Raymond Cole had, prior to the establishment of the trust, executed a valid legal instrument conveying the property at 417 Garfield Street to Vanessa Cole in full. Attached to the petition was a document described as a property conveyance agreement. It bore my name, my address, the address of the property, and what purported to be my signature and right index fingerprint. The date on the document was April 9th. I had been admitted to St. Catherine Medical Center on April 7th. I had not regained full consciousness until April 11th. She filed this with the court, I said. This morning, Diane confirmed. Her attorney of record is a man named Garrett Fowles. He has a general practice downtown, handles mostly small civil matters. My guess is he does not know the full picture of what he's been handed. I stood up from the table. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard at the strip of grass Frank kept cut, but not manicured at the fence line, where a neighbor's oak tree dropped leaves into the yard regardless of the season. "Diane," I said, "the fingerprint on that document. Which hand?" A pause. I heard paper moving. "Right index finger," she said. "Standard placement, lower right corner of the signature block." I lifted my right hand and looked at it. The accident had happened in September of 2009, a Tuesday morning, during a routine maintenance cycle on a metal lathe at the shop. The workpiece had shifted at exactly the wrong moment. The injury had been clean, as these things go, the tip of my right index finger from the first knuckle up taken off in a fraction of a second. I had been back at work in 3 weeks. I had not thought about it much in the years since the way you stop thinking about a scar once it becomes part of the ordinary landscape of your own body. I held my right hand up in the light from the kitchen window. The right index finger ended at the first knuckle. Above that, nothing. Smooth skin over old bone healed 15 years ago, permanent and unambiguous, and completely impossible to replicate on a document without the person who made it being present and physically capable of making it. Whoever had pressed a right index fingerprint onto that conveyance agreement had a complete right index finger, which meant it was not mine. I set my hand back down on the counter. Something moved through my chest that was not quite satisfaction and not quite anger. It was closer to the feeling you get on the shop floor when a machine that has been running wrong finally reveals the exact nature of its failure, and you understand that you know how to fix it and that the fix is going to hold. "Diane," I said, "I need you to listen to me carefully." "I'm listening," she said. In September of 2009, I lost the tip of my right index finger in a workplace accident at Cole and DeLuca Machine Works on Industrial Boulevard. The injury was documented by the shop's workers' compensation insurance carrier, by my treating physician at Memorial Hermann, and by the Texas Department of Insurance Workers' Compensation Division. The records are 31 years old, and they are complete. A silence. Then Diane said very quietly, "Raymond, the fingerprint on that document," I said, "belongs to someone with a complete right index finger. That person is not me. It has not been me since 2009. Another silence. Longer. I heard her exhale slowly, the controlled breath of a woman who has just understood something that changes the shape of everything around it. "I need you to come to my office," she said. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, bring Noah." "We'll be there," I said. "Raymond, one more thing. Do you have documentation of the workplace injury medical records, the workers' comp filing, anything with your name and the date and the nature of the injury?" "Frank DeLuca was my shop supervisor when it happened," I said. "He filed the incident report himself. He kept a copy." I heard what might have been a laugh quickly contained. "Of course he did," Diane said. After I ended the call, I stood at the kitchen window for a moment, with my right hand resting on the counter, the shortened index finger visible at the edge of my sight. 15 years I had lived with that hand without giving it much thought. Maggie had never once treated it as anything other than ordinary. She had held it the same way she held the other one, without adjustment or accommodation, because to her it was simply the hand of the man she was married to, and that was sufficient. I thought about Vanessa sitting somewhere across the city, believing she had played her last card successfully, believing the document she had filed would hold, believing that a signature and a fingerprint were enough to undo everything Maggie and I had built, and everything Maggie had quietly protected before she left. She had pressed someone else's fingerprint onto a legal document. She had pressed it onto a legal document and put my name above it, and she had done it without knowing or without caring that my right index finger had been missing for 15 years, and that every record of that fact had been sitting in Frank DeLuca's filing cabinet on Elmwood Street for the entirety of the time she had been planning this. I went to the bottom of the stairs and called up to Noah. "Put on your jacket," I said. "We need to talk to Frank." Noah appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked at my face and read something in it that made him move faster. He was down the stairs in 10 seconds with his jacket already on. "What happened?" he asked. I held up my right hand. He looked at it at the index finger ending at the first knuckle, and then he looked at my face, and I watched the understanding arrive in his expression, the way light arrives in a room when someone opens a door. "She didn't know," he said. She didn't know," I confirmed. Frank was in the garage when we came through the side door. He looked up from the carburetor he had been cleaning and saw our faces and set the carburetor down on the workbench without being asked. "Tell me," he said. I told him. When I finished, he looked at my right hand for a long moment. Then he looked at the filing cabinet in the corner of the garage, gray metal, 4 drawers, 31 years of paperwork organized in Frank's precise and particular way. "Second drawer," he said. "September 2009. I've got the incident report, the workers' comp filing, and the hospital discharge summary." He pulled off his work gloves. "Give me 2 minutes. Before I reveal the shocking truth in the next part, leave a 100 in the comments, so I know you're still here with me. And please note the following part contains some fictionalized elements and may not be entirely factual if you prefer not to listen to this type of story. Feel free to skip or turn off the video right here." Diane Holloway's office was on the 14th floor of a building on Louisiana Street in downtown Houston, with windows that looked west toward the sprawl of the city, and on clear mornings all the way to the flat horizon where the suburbs dissolved into the coastal plain. I had been there twice before, once with Maggie in January, when we signed the trust documents, and once alone in March, the week after the service, when I had needed to understand what the documents we had signed actually meant for what came next. This time I came with Noah on my left and Frank on my right, and Frank was carrying a manila folder that contained 31 years of a filing habit that was about to matter more than either of us had anticipated when he had started it. Diane met us at the elevator. She shook my hand and looked at my face with the directness of a woman who had learned to read clients accurately and quickly, and whatever she saw appeared to satisfy her. She led us down a hallway and into a conference room with a long table, 4 chairs on each side, and a window at the far end that let in the flat, white light of an August morning. Garrett Fowles was already there. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s, with a careful haircut and a suit that was slightly too formal for the occasion, the way suits are when someone is trying to project authority they have not yet fully grown into. He had a legal pad in front of him and a pen in his hand, and he was sitting very straight in his chair. Vanessa was not present. Her attorney was speaking for her, which told me she had been advised not to come, which told me someone along the way had given her better counsel than she had been following for the past several months. Beside Diane sat a woman she introduced as Patricia Kern, a forensic document examiner with 20 years of experience in question document analysis. Patricia Kern was 60 years old, small, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the particular calm of a person who has spent 2 decades being the most important person in rooms exactly like this one. Garrett Fowles began by restating the petition. The property conveyance agreement, he said, represented a valid prior disposition of the property that predated the trust, and therefore superseded it under Texas law. He presented the document across the table to Diane with the confidence of a man who believed he was holding something that could not be argued with. Diane thanked him and passed it to Patricia Kern without looking at it herself. Patricia examined it for 90 seconds. She had a small magnification loupe that she used on the fingerprint in the lower right corner, holding it steady with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times. Then she set the loupe down and looked at Diane and gave one small nod. Diane looked at me. "Raymond, would you put your right hand on the table, please?" I placed my right hand flat on the conference table, palm down, fingers extended. Garrett Fowles looked at it. I watched the moment of comprehension arrive in his face, the slight slackening around the eyes, the almost imperceptible pause in his breathing. He looked at my right index finger, ending cleanly at the first knuckle, and then he looked at the document in front of Patricia Kern, and then he looked at his legal pad, as though it might offer some alternative explanation. It did not. Patricia Kern spoke for the first time. Her voice was dry and precise, the voice of a woman who chose her words the way a machinist chose. Tolerances exactly right. No wider than necessary. The fingerprint impression in the lower right corner of this document was made by a right index finger with a complete distal phalanx, she said. The distal phalanx is the outermost segment of the finger from the first knuckle to the fingertip. Mr. Cole's right index finger does not have a distal phalanx. It has not had one since. She glanced at Frank's folder, which Diane had passed to her before the meeting began. September of 2009, per the workers' compensation documentation and the treating physician's discharge summary from Memorial Hermann Hospital. She set her pen down. This fingerprint was not made by Raymond Cole. Garrett Fowles had stopped writing on his legal pad. His pen was still in his hand, but it had not moved in 30 seconds. Diane spoke. "Mr. Fowles, I want to be straightforward with you. I don't believe you had full knowledge of the circumstances surrounding this document when you agreed to represent this petition. I am telling you now as clearly as I can that the document your client submitted to this court was not signed by Raymond Cole, was not fingerprinted by Raymond Cole, and was dated to a period during which Raymond Cole was documented as unconscious in a hospital intensive care unit." She placed 3 pages on the table in front of him. St. Catherine Medical Center admission records, April 7th through April 11th. Mr. Cole was not discharged until the morning of April 12th. Fowles picked up the admission records. He read the top page. He set it back down carefully with the deliberate gentleness of a man handling something he wishes he had never picked up. "I need to make a phone call," he said. "Of course," Diane said. He excused himself. The door closed behind him. The conference room was quiet for a moment, the particular quality of quiet that follows a thing that cannot be taken back. Noah exhaled beside me. It was a long, slow breath, the kind that has been held for a while. Frank was looking at the document on the table with the expression he used on the shop floor when a component had failed in a way that was going to require significant correction. He was not angry. He was simply assessing. I looked out the window at the August morning over Houston. The city spread west in every direction, flat and enormous, indifferent and alive. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was waiting for a phone call that was going to tell her the ground had gone out from under her completely. I did not feel satisfaction. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. I did not feel vindicated or triumphant or relieved. I felt the way I felt after a long repair, tired in the bones, clear in the mind, and certain that the work had been done correctly. Maggie used to say that justice was not a feeling. It was a condition. It was the state of things when they were arranged the way they were supposed to be. You did not celebrate it. You simply recognized it and kept working. I thought about her sitting across from Diane Holloway in this same building in January, signing papers with hands that were already beginning to lose their steadiness from the treatment, thinking about me and about the house and about everything she wanted to hold in place before she left. I thought about that, and I kept my right hand flat on the table where everyone in the room could see it, and I waited for Garrett Fowles to come back through the door. Derek called at 9:14 that evening. I know the exact time because I was looking at the clock on the nightstand when the phone lit up, a habit from 31 years of shift work, where knowing the time was not a casual thing, but a professional one. I had been lying on top of the covers in Frank's upstairs room for an hour, not sleeping, not reading, just letting the day settle through me, the way sediment settles through water when the current finally stops. I looked at the screen. Derek Cole. I picked up. For several seconds there was nothing but the sound of breathing on the other end. Not the controlled breathing of a man composing himself before speaking, the ragged, uneven breathing of a man who has been crying and has not entirely stopped. I had heard that sound before. I had heard it the morning Maggie died, when Derek had called me from the hospital parking lot, because he could not make himself come back inside. I waited. Dad. His voice came out broken in the middle, split across the single syllable like wood along a grain line. He tried again. Dad, I need to. I don't know how to. He stopped. I heard him pull in a breath that shook on both ends. Take your time, I said. He took it. Almost a full minute passed. Outside on Elmwood Street, a car went by with its radio up, something with a heavy bass line that faded quickly and left the night quiet again. Frank's house settled around me with the small sounds old houses make a creak in the hallway, the distant tick of the water heater. Garrett Fowles called Vanessa this afternoon, Derek said finally. His voice had steadied slightly the way a man's voice steadies when he makes himself focus on facts, because the feelings underneath them are too large to look at directly. She called me after. She told me what happened in that office. A pause. She told me about your hand. I did not say anything. I didn't know about your finger, Dad. His voice cracked again on the last word. I swear to you I didn't know. She told me she had a document you had signed before the hospital. She said you had agreed to it and then forgotten that the confusion was part of why we needed to act quickly. He stopped. I believed her. I know how that sounds. I know exactly how that sounds, and I am not asking you to accept it as an excuse. I am just telling you what happened inside my head. I sat up on the edge of the bed. The nightstand lamp was on, throwing a small circle of yellow light across the floor. I could see the wrench on the nightstand from where I was sitting. Raymond and Margaret Cole, December 1985. The engraving worn slightly smooth from handling, but still legible. Derek, I said, tell me what you knew. He told me. He went through it in the stumbling, non-linear way of a man who has rehearsed a confession and then abandoned the rehearsal because the real thing requires something the rehearsal did not account for. He had known about the taxi and Beaumont before it happened. He had provided Vanessa with Marcus Webb's contact information from a car service he had used for business travel. He had been inside my house the night of the break-in, standing in the hallway, while Vanessa went through the filing cabinet. He had known about the plan to challenge the trust and had agreed to be listed as a co-petitioner before Vanessa had moved forward on her own with the conveyance document, which he said he had not seen before she filed it. I told myself it was for the best, he said. That you would be taken care of. That the facility would be good. That you were not well enough to be managing all of this alone. His voice had gone hollow. I told myself a lot of things, Dad. I was very good at it. I looked at the wrench on the nightstand. I know you were, I said. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Derek said very quietly, "Are you going to press charges?" I had been thinking about this since the afternoon sitting in Diane's conference room after Fowles had gone to make his phone call, and the room had settled into the particular stillness of a resolved situation. I had thought about what Maggie would have said, not what she would have told me to do. Maggie had never been in the business of telling me what to do, but what she would have observed in that careful and precise way she had of identifying the true shape of a thing underneath its surface appearance. She would have said that punishment without direction was just damage. She would have said that a door left open was worth more than a cell door closed, not for Derek's sake, but for the sake of the man Raymond Cole wanted to be when this was over. "I'm not going to cooperate with a criminal prosecution," I said. "I won't file a civil suit. I won't be a willing witness against you." I paused. "But Derek, I want you to understand something. That decision is mine. The district attorney's office makes its own decisions based on the evidence that exists, and I do not control what they do with what they have. I am telling you what I will and will not do. I am not telling you that nothing else will happen." He was crying again. Not the ragged, uncontrolled crying from earlier, something quieter, more deliberate, the kind that comes when relief and shame arrive simultaneously, and there is not enough room inside a person to separate them. "Why?" he asked. "After everything, why?" I thought about that for a moment. I thought about 31 years of shift work and every machine I had ever fixed, and the understanding that had lived in my hands long before it lived anywhere else, that you did not destroy a thing that could still be repaired, and that the decision about whether something could still be repaired required honesty above everything else. "Because your mother believed that accountability should lead somewhere," I said. "It should not just leave a person broken on the far side of it." I paused. "You are going to pay your own debts, Derek. Every dollar. Without help from me. You are going to see a therapist, not because I am requiring it, but because I am telling you that you need it. And you are not going to contact me about money, about property, about anything financial for as long as I am alive." He said he understood. He said it twice. "There is one more thing," I said. "I am not forgiving you tonight. I want to be clear about that. Forgiveness is not something I can hand you in a phone call. It is something you will have to watch me do slowly from a distance over a very long time, if I am able to do it at all." Derek did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was so quiet I almost missed it. "I'll wait," he said. "However long it takes." I ended the call. I set the phone on the nightstand beside the wrench. The room was quiet. The lamp made its small circle of light on the floor and left the rest of the room in shadow. I picked up the wrench. I held it in both hands the way I had held it 100 times over the past 3 months, not gripping it, just holding it, feeling the weight of it, the specific balance that had not changed in 39 years. Then I set it back down and turned off the lamp and lay back on top of the covers and looked at the ceiling in the dark. Somewhere across the city, my son was sitting with what he had done. I could not carry that for him. I had spent 68 years carrying things for people who had let me believe they needed it, and I understood now with the particular clarity that comes only after a very long time that the carrying had not always helped them the way I had told myself it did. Some weights a man has to lift himself. That is the only way he learns whether he is strong enough. Noah brought the notebook down 3 days later on a Friday evening, when Frank had finally opened the kitchen windows for the first time in weeks. He set it on the table in front of me without explanation. Standard composition notebook, black and white, cover $2 at any drugstore in America. Maggie's handwriting on the front, blue ink for Raymond. When he needs to remember. I looked at it for a moment. Then I picked it up and opened to the first page, Noah sat across from me and opened his own book to his page. His way of saying he was present, but not watching. It was the same thing Maggie used to do when I came home from a difficult shift. I had never told her I noticed. I was telling it now to no one in the privacy of my own recollection, and it landed with the full weight of everything I had not said while there was still time to say it. The early pages were ordinary. A note about a neighbor's dog, a recipe she had adjusted, 3 lines about a phone call with her sister in Corpus Christi that had made her laugh harder than she had in months. The handwriting of a woman who did not yet know what was coming, who was simply moving through her days and finding them worth recording. I read slowly. I was not in a hurry. I had nowhere to be. About a third of the way through, the entries changed. Not in handwriting, Maggie's hand stayed steady longer than her doctors expected, but in subject. The notes became deliberate. She was writing things down because she wanted them to exist after she could no longer say them out loud. I found the Thanksgiving entry on a page with a small water stain in the upper corner that I chose not to examine too closely. She had written it late after I had gone to bed. She wrote that she had watched me from the dining room doorway before I heard her on the stairs. She wrote that I had set 5 plates on the table and then stood looking at them for a long moment before carrying 2 back to the cabinet. Quietly, the way I did most things, she wrote. He put 2 plates away, so I would not have to see the empty chairs. He has been doing things like this for 39 years, and I have been watching, and I have not always said so, and I am writing it down now because I want him to know that I always saw, every single time. I set the notebook down. I pressed the heel of my right hand against my eyes. The shortened index finger rested against my forehead. I held it there and did not try to manage what was happening in my chest, because there was no point managing it, and Maggie would have told me so directly. Noah did not look up from his book. He gave me the room to have it. After a while, I picked the notebook back up. The entries from the months of treatment were shorter, a sentence or 2 on days when she had the energy for sentences and not paragraphs. But she had not stopped. Even on the difficult days, she had written something, because Maggie believed that writing a thing down was the act of insisting it was real. I found the last entry near the bottom of the final written page. The handwriting was slower, each letter placed with the care of someone working against a hand that was not entirely cooperating, but it was still hers. She had written, "Raymond is going to be fine. Not because the world is kind, it isn't always, but because he has spent 68 years making it kinder, one small thing at a time, and that does not stop mattering when a person is gone. It accumulates. The neighbors who bring casseroles, the man whose car he fixed on the highway, the children who grew up watching him fix things and learned, without being taught, that broken things can be made whole again. All of it counts." Then one more line, and then the page went blank. "I hope Raymond finds his way to a life large enough to hold everything he has always been. He has always been larger than the space he allowed himself to occupy. I would like him to take up more room now." I closed the notebook. Frank had come in from the garage at some point and was sitting at the counter with his coffee. The window above the sink was open. A cricket somewhere in the backyard made the sound crickets make on August evenings in Houston, persistent, rhythmic, indifferent to everything except itself. Noah closed his book. He looked at me across the table. "She saw everything," I said. His throat moved. "She always did." Frank got up without a word and set a fresh cup of coffee in front of me. That was the language he had always spoken most fluently, not words, just the right thing at the right moment. I looked at the notebook. I looked at the wrench on the table beside it. I looked at Noah across from me and at Frank at the counter and at the open window and the dark backyard beyond it. Maggie had written 3 days before she died that she hoped I would take up more room. I thought, this is the room. This is exactly the right amount of room. Diane set the folder on the table in front of me. The tab read, Carol Cole Foundation Articles of Incorporation. She folded her hands and looked at me directly. The trust holds the property at 417 Garfield Street, valued at $1,850,000, and the savings account with $312,000 remaining after legal fees. Once transferred into the foundation, those assets cannot return to personal ownership. Ever. She paused. Are you certain? I thought about Maggie writing in her notebook 3 days before she died. About Marcus Webb on the shoulder of Route 10. About Dorothy Patterson standing at the curb holding my wrench with both hands. I have been certain since January 14th, I said. I just did not know it yet. We went through the documents page by page. The Foundation's board, Raymond Cole, founding chair. Noah Cole, executive director. Frank DeLuca, director of instruction. Reverend Gerald Thomas, community liaison. When Diane read Frank's name aloud, he shifted in his chair and cleared his throat twice. You didn't ask me, he said. I knew what you'd say, I told him. You could have asked anyway. Frank, do you want to teach the first class? He looked at the table, then at me. I've been teaching that class for 40 years. Only difference now is somebody's going to write it down official. We signed where Diane pointed. When it was done, she said quietly, Maggie would have liked this. She planned it, I said. I just showed up and signed where you pointed. We drove to Industrial Boulevard after. Frank unlocked the old shop. The smell hit me, first metal and oil and the cool darkness of a space not entirely abandoned. The equipment was still there. The lathes, the drill press, the pegboard Frank had installed in 2003 tools still hanging in their labeled positions. I stood in the center of the floor where I had stood for 31 years. You ready? I asked Frank. He pulled on his work gloves. I've been ready since 2017, he said. I just needed a reason. The morning of the opening, I put on my work clothes for the first time since I had retired. Not dress clothes. My actual work clothes, heavy canvas pants, the gray long-sleeve shirt worn soft from 100 washings, the steel-toed boots I had resoled twice because the uppers were still good. I picked up the wrench from the nightstand. Raymond and Margaret Cole. December 1985. I put it in my jacket pocket and went downstairs. Frank had the shop open before 6. Noah drove us down Industrial Boulevard in the October light, that particular clear blue Houston sky that only arrives after summer finally releases its grip. The sign above the door stopped me in the parking lot. White letters on dark blue Maggie's colors. Carol Cole Foundation for Vocational Education and Trade Training. Giving opportunity to those who need it most. 12 young people arrived by 9:15. Frank stood inside with his work gloves on, and I watched parents pause at the door, read the sign, and let something go in their faces, the specific relief of finding a place that looks like what it claims to be. Noah took my photograph in front of the sign, work gloves on. October sun. I opened the family group chat for the first time since May. The old messages were still there. I scrolled past them, added the photograph, and typed, "Your mother's name is on a building on Industrial Boulevard today. Everything she and I built together is going to teach young people how to build things with their hands. I have done my part. You are adults. Live like it." I sent it. I did not wait to see if anyone responded. A dark sedan pulled to the curb across the street. It stayed 2 minutes. Then it pulled away and disappeared into the ordinary flow of an October morning. I walked to the south workbench. I set the wrench down not as a memorial, just as a tool where tools belonged. I picked up a socket set and got to work. Outside, Houston kept moving. Inside, the machines started up one by one, metal and purpose, and the sound of broken things being made whole again. It was a very good morning to be Raymond Cole. If this grandpa story taught me anything, it is this: the quietest people in the room are often carrying the heaviest things. I carried for 68 years, without complaint, without invoice, without asking anyone to notice. I do not recommend it. Do not be like me. Say the hard thing while the person is still there to hear it. Do not assume that the people you love understand what you have given up for them. Tell them. Not because you need the credit, but because silence, however dignified, can be mistaken for indifference by the very people who matter most. I believe God puts certain people in our path at exactly the right moment. Marcus Webb on the shoulder of Route 10, Dorothy Patterson at the curb with my wrench, Frank DeLuca opening a door at 10 o'clock at night without asking why. That is not coincidence. That is something larger than coincidence, and I am grateful for it every morning I wake up. This has been my family story, imperfect, painful, and ultimately worth telling. If any piece of it reminded you of someone you have been meaning to call, please go call them. Today, not tomorrow. If this grandpa story moved you, you leave a comment below and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so this family story finds the people it was meant for. Thank you sincerely for staying until the very end. The stories on this channel contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and meaningful life lessons. If that is not the content you are looking for, we completely understand and encourage you to find what speaks to you best.